Hello, and welcome back to the official podcast of the Bison Regional Science Fair, BRSF STEMcasts. Today we've got another special episode where we will be finishing off our two-part series on setting up a successful science fair project in preparation for the upcoming Bison Regional Science Fair or wherever else your regional science fair is. If you haven't yet seen the last episode, make sure to go and watch it because it will teach you some tips on how to set up your science fair for success, while this one will help you figure out how to execute that success. So, on that note, here to help us today is a very special guest and my very good friend Nina, who is in the process of writing her own science fair project, and we'll pick up where we left off last week. Nina, thank you very much for being here today.
Let's get into the interview. Picking up from where we left off, what should we do when writing out the methodology?
So, the methodology should be a description of the most important aspects of how you got your results and why you might have done things a specific way. Depending on what type of project yours is, that is a research, experimentation, or an innovation project, the methodology should, respectively, describe the criteria by which you gathered relevant research material, the steps you took to conduct your experiment, or your entire innovation model.
How should the methodology be formatted?
That's a good question. So, a lot of people think the methodology should be formatted like a numbered list for a DIY project or a baking recipe. And while it's not completely wrong, it's not completely right either. The methodology should just be a past tense description of what you did to come to your results. And you can kind of think of it like almost how a history textbook should be written.
What are some common mistakes you see in the methodology?
Well, besides formatting the methodology like a list, I've also noticed that many people like to write their methodology from their own perspective. Basically, the methodology becomes a long list or a body of text consisting of first I did this, then I did this, and then after that this happened, etc., etc. And this is a big no-no because the methodology follows the same rules as the rest of the project. It should be written from the third person and should not include personal pronouns like I, me, my, and myself. And going back to whatever else I said earlier, that is first I did this, then this happened, then after this happened, etc., etc., that is exactly how you make a methodology, what should be the most interesting part of your project, boring. So, like the introduction, write it like an English essay, describing the project's events in a creative way that will keep your readers engaged. So what I'm trying to get at is that your methodology should be formatted properly, in the third person with no personal pronouns, kind of like a history textbook. The only thing that you have to do that history textbooks don't is make what you're talking about interesting or exciting.
Moving on, how should the data and results section look?
So the data and results section should include a brief introduction describing what the following graphs and tables show data on, the graphs themselves that display the data from your research, experiments or innovation model, and finally captions that describe the data and why you collected it. Now when I say captions, I don't mean interpretations. Captions should really only describe the displayed data, as in what it actually is, why it's relevant to your project, and why you collected it. They shouldn't have any of your personal bias at all, because that's for the next section, interpretations and conclusions.
What are your tips on writing interpretations and conclusions?
So this section should be how you wrap up your project. It should answer your research questions, prove your hypothesis, and provide evidence as to why your hypothesis was correct. And for this segment, you really want to cite your literature review and data and results sections as much as possible to make your interpretations and conclusions look as strong as possible. And that's because statements are stronger when there's evidence to support them. So the more evidence you have to support your conclusions, which of course should come from the literature review as well as your data and results, the more sound your conclusions. So to top it all off, this section could also suggest real-world applications or future steps for your project.
What should the works cited section look like?
So the works cited is perhaps the most boring and time-consuming section of a science fair project. But having said that, it's probably one of the most important sections because it'll help prevent you from getting disqualified off of making baseless claims and plagiarism. And therefore, you should take lots of care into making sure your works cited section is written correctly. And that means your works cited section should abide by the APA's regulations on citations, or the APA format, because that's what most science fairs nowadays follow. Luckily enough, there are a bunch of online citation machines that you can use to your advantage to reduce the amount of time you have to spend on the works cited section, while still making sure it's all written correctly.
So that concludes our tips on every single section of a science fair project, and you should help out our viewers and listeners during this upcoming science fair season.
I really hope it does, but if you guys have any further questions, make sure to leave them down below in the comments, or at BRSF_MB on Instagram, or at Bison Fair on Twitter. Make sure to like and subscribe for all the latest news in STEM and all the best science fair tips and tricks, and we'll see you here next time on STEMcasts. Bye-bye!